From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
My name is Michelle Bachmann. I stand here in the midst of many friends and many family members to announce formally my candidacy for President of the United States.
The rising star of the Tea Party movement, Minnesota Congressmember Michelle Bachmann, launches her bid for president. We'll look at how she's built her campaign on opposing gay marriage and abortion and accusing President Obama of pushing the U.S. towards socialism. Then 2 U.S. nuclear plants in Nebraska are surrounded by rising floodwaters, and raging wildfires in New Mexico have shut down the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Then in Pakistan, an inquiry has begun into the torture and murder of journalist Salim Shahzad.
Circumstantial evidence points towards our own intelligence agencies that they are somehow complicit in it. And even if they are not, it's their responsibility to trace Salim Shahzad's killers.
We'll speak with Human Rights Watch. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Thousands of Greek demonstrators have begun gathering in front of the Greek parliament at the start of a 48-hour general strike. Union leaders called for the strike to protest against painful cuts demanded by international lenders as the price for more financial aid. The Greek parliament's due to vote this week on a package of spending cuts, tax increases, and privatizations agreed as part of a massive bailout aimed at averting the Eurozone's first default. Greek protesters have condemned the government's plans.
These measures are destroying the Greek people. Unfortunately, the measures will be passed through Parliament. The people on the outside must not accept them. Whatever they vote inside, we must not accept it in any form. Because the people are suffering and our children will suffer.
The Wall Street Journal reports Greece is considering privatizing much of the country, including the state lottery, a state horse racing concession, several ports, a national post office, 2 water companies, a munitions maker, electricity and gas monopolies, a telecommunications operator, hundreds of miles of roads and thousands of acres of land, including magnificent stretches of Greece's famed coast. Japanese authorities revealed today 15 tons of radioactive water was discovered to have leaked into the ground from the Fukushima nuclear plant. Meanwhile, Japanese researchers have released the results of radiation tests conducted on 15 people who lived in towns about 25 miles from the plant. Radioactive cesium was found in all 15. Radioactive iodine was found in 6 of them. In related news, Japanese officials say radiation meters will be distributed in the coming months to about 34,000 children living in the largest city near the nuclear plant to monitor their exposure levels. The dosimeters will be given to children between the ages of 4 and 15 living in Fukushima City, about 45 miles from the nuclear facility. Here in the United States, the Los Alamos Nuclear Weapons Lab in New Mexico has been shut down for a second day as a massive wildfire approaches the facility. The Anti-Nuclear Watch Group, Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety, says the fire now appears to be about 3.5 miles from a dump site at the lab, where as many as 30,000 55-gallon drums of plutonium-contaminated waste are stored in fabric tents above ground. We'll have more on Los Alamos later in the broadcast. Israel is continuing to threaten a group of international activists who are planning to sail to Gaza this week with humanitarian aid. Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman said participants in the 10-boat flotilla were seeking, quote, confrontation and blood. Last year, Israeli forces killed 9 activists, one of them a U.S. citizen, aboard the Gaza-bound Mavi Marmara. Ehud Barak is Israel's defense minister.
The instruction that I give to the Israeli Defense Forces, backed by the cabinet, is to stop the maritime vessels in case they try to reach Gaza. We will warn them, explain, and try to avoid confrontation. But at the end of the day, the flotilla cannot get to Gaza, and therefore we call upon all involved to cancel it and determine that in such a case of any kind of confrontation or damage, the responsibility lies with the participants and organizers of the flotilla.
Meanwhile, activists say one of the 10 boats scheduled to sail to Gaza has been sabotaged in a Greek port. Saboteurs reportedly cut off the propeller shaft of a ship shared by Swedish, Norwegian and Greek activists. Organizers say the boat will be repaired in time to sail to Gaza. The Libyan government has dismissed the arrest warrants for Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and 2 of his closest aides. Libya says it rejects the charges of war crimes and does not recognize the legitimacy of the International Criminal Court. But Libyans in rebel-held areas of the country celebrated news of the arrest warrants.
We've been waiting not from the beginning of this revolution from 42 years ago, and I hope justice will prevail and everyone will be happy.
190 members of the Syrian opposition were allowed to hold a rare public meeting Monday in Damascus, the first since Syria's anti-government uprising began. Most of the participants called for Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad to surrender absolute power. Meanwhile, video has been posted online that reportedly shows Syrian security forces beating men in Damascus with batons and stuffing them into the trunk of a car. In news from Afghanistan, more than 250,000 Afghans have fled their villages during the past 2 years of fighting. This according to a new report from Refugees International. The group's report criticized U.S. military efforts, saying, quote, the increasing use of airstrikes by the International Security Assistance Force and the Afghan National Security Forces, as well as night raids by U.S. Special Forces, is destroying homes, crops, and basic infrastructure, traumatizing civilians and displacing tens of thousands of people. Refugee International says the number of people fleeing their homes in Afghanistan has more than doubled over the past year. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 2 U.S. drones have killed at least 21 people in South Waziristan Monday. In one of its final decisions of the term, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down part of Arizona's public financing law Monday. In a 5-4 decision, the justices invalidated a key part of the law that provides additional public money to political candidates for state office who face big spending opponents. The Supreme Court also struck down on First Amendment grounds a California law that barred the sale of violent video games to children. Meanwhile, the High Court rejected an appeal from former prisoners at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq who wanted to sue the military contractors, Khaki International and Titan Corporation, over claims of abuse and torture. In other legal news, a federal judge has blocked key parts of a Georgia law modeled on last year's anti-immigrant measure in Arizona. On Monday, U.S. District Judge Thomas Thrash of Atlanta struck down provisions that would have criminalized those who help undocumented immigrants and require police to verify the legal status of anyone not carrying identification. Judge Thrash ruled the Georgia measures violate federal jurisdiction over immigration enforcement. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, Republican Governor Nikki Haley is preparing to sign a similar measure into law following its approval in the state legislature last week. The UN Security Council has unanimously approved a U.S.-drafted resolution authorizing the deployment of 4,200 Ethiopian troops to Sudan's disputed Abyei region for a 6-month period. The vote comes a week after North and South Sudan signed a deal in Addis Ababa to demilitarize Abyei and let Ethiopian troops monitor the peace. South Sudan is due to secede from the North to form a new nation on July 9th, but the North and South have yet to agree on who will control Abyei. Meanwhile, aid workers have reported continued bombing in South Kordofan, which borders both Abyei and South Sudan. Philip Parham is the head of the British mission to the United Nations.
We remain deeply concerned about the situation in South Kordofan, both the humanitarian situation and the security situation, including the aerial bombardment in that area by Sudanese armed forces. It's crucial that the parties end hostilities as soon as possible and reach a peaceful conclusion to the situation there under the auspices of the AU High-Level Implementation Panel in Addis Ababa.
A trial is underway in Cambodia for the 4 most senior surviving members of the Khmer Rouge. The former officials face charges that include crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, religious persecution, homicide, and torture. The Khmer Rouge is believed to have killed at least 1.7 million Cambodians during the late 70s. All 4 of the accused have pled not guilty to the charges against them. Stephen Rapp is the U.S. Ambassador at Large for war crimes issues.
This is such a traumatic event in the history of this country that touched on every single person here. A quarter of the population murdered, a country turned back to the year zero. And an understanding of why it happened and how it happened, I think, is really critical to going forward. And that's, I think, why there's such an outpouring of interest here and why it's so important that the international community support this trial to the end.
A trial has begun for 5 New Orleans police officers accused of shooting and killing unarmed citizens, then covering up their crimes in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. Federal prosecutor Bobby Bernstein accused the officers of adopting a policy of, quote, shoot first, ask questions later. In the days that followed the 2005 hurricane, at least 6 people were killed following run-ins with the New Orleans Police Department, nearly all of them African-American, including the infamous Danziger Bridge incident, during which officers shot 6 citizens, killing 2 of them. There have been a series of developments in the struggle over reproductive rights in the United States. On Sunday, Wisconsin became the latest state to ban funding for the group Planned Parenthood and its 9 clinics statewide. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker approved the cuts as part of a $66 billion budget bill slashing public spending. The move against Planned Parenthood follows earlier measures in Kansas and North Carolina. But in a blow to the defunding effort, a federal judge in Indiana has issued an injunction against a state law blocking Planned Parenthood from taking part in Medicaid. The Indiana ruling marked Planned Parenthood's first ruling against the wave of defunding laws. Alabama, meanwhile, has recently become the 6th state to ban abortions after the 20th week of pregnancy, following Nebraska, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Oklahoma. Reproductive rights groups have yet to file suit, but say challenges are forthcoming. Former Illinois Democratic Governor Rod Blagojevich has been convicted on 17 different charges, including trying to sell or trade President Obama's old Senate seat and attempting to shake down executives for campaign cash. Together, the charges would bear a maximum sentence of 300 years, but Blagojevich is likely to spend roughly a decade behind bars. A 20-year-old Muslim woman from California has sued the clothing store Abercrombie & Fitch, claiming the retailer fired her when she refused to remove her headscarf, known as a hijab, while working. 2 other former Muslim employees of Abercrombie & Fitch filed similar lawsuits against the store. And floodwaters are beginning to slowly recede near the North Dakota town of Minot after record-breaking water levels displaced some 12,000 residents there and destroyed over 4,000 homes. According to a FEMA spokesperson, just 375 of the 4,000 ruined homes were protected by flood insurance. Residents say they were led to believe the coverage was unnecessary because levees were constructed and the Souris River Channel was straightened following a major flood in 1969. Residents are not expected to return to their homes for at least 10 days. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.